some seats in the front. I feel like I'm a professor.
Good.
Anyway, yeah. Hey, welcome everyone. Thanks for making it to our first event for the Northwest Robotics Alliance. For those who I haven't met, my name is Aseem Datar. I'm a partner here at Madrona Ventures. And at Madrona, we're very excited about this world of robotics and automation. Last year around this time, I wrote up our thesis along with my partner Tim and Sabrina from Madrona around why we believe in this space. And I got invited to sort of share our thesis and our belief on this domain at a conference in Pittsburgh that our friends at Cascadia put forth. And whilst there, I met a lot of like-minded people who shared the love for robotics, and we were able to exchange ideas and our thesis and our belief in this space. But there was one more thing that was common in addition to our love for robotics, was that a lot of us were from Seattle in the Pacific Northwest. And so obviously we got talking, we wondered like, hey, why are we traveling from here to there when there's so much happening here? And so, from that was born this idea of, wouldn't it be awesome to sort of have a community of folks established here that compare notes, that have the single unified goal of investing in robotics and making sure that robotics is successful in the Pacific Northwest. Now this place is really special. First of all, there's amazing talent in the Pacific Northwest. There's a lot of folks, some of us in this room, working on cutting edge technologies and trying to build something and push the envelope of creation. Then there is this whole notion of big techs, investing in these areas. There is great research happening at UW, at Portland, in Oregon, in Vancouver, and then there's areas like, then there's labs like AI2 sort of leading the charge on innovation in these spaces. And then finally, there's more unique things in this area around, like this being the cloud capital. There's leadership in the aviation industry. There's work happening in ag tech. There is a lot of pushing the envelope happening in retail and supply chain and consumer tech. And so all these things make the Pacific Northwest really special, and we're sort of bullish on making robotics succeed. So the Northwest Robotics Alliance was formed out of this goal of bringing together community, establishing an ecosystem, sharing best practices, seeking out design partners, seeking out early customers, collaborating with each other, learning from our mistakes, and finally kind of really making sure that we double down on the success in this area. Now there's a few things that have changed in the world in the recent past. One is the pandemic has sort of forced all of us to think about touchless, remote first, more automation. No matter which way you cut the data, there is this reality around labor shortage and skilled labor shortage in the world that's forcing us to think about more autonomous systems that operate on their own, with human assistance perhaps. On the technology side, of course there's computing at the edge. There is command and control and decision making at the edge. There's faster networks, there's ML models, and now recently, in the last 6 weeks, there's this explosion about generative AI that kind of adds more rocket fuel. And then finally, in addition to all of these factors, there is the business model evolution around like moving from CapEx to OpEx. Like customers looking at it and saying, hey, do I lease systems versus buy systems? And so there's all these tailwinds coming together, which reinforces our belief in the fact that this is an area that is poised to explode. And I'm thankful to my friends at Cascadia, Firdaus here and Jeff, without whose support we wouldn't be able to sort of kickstart this. Now, this is the first event that we're doing for the community. You can expect many more in the future. And I'm thankful for a few folks on our team who have been tirelessly working behind the scenes, like Lisa and John from Madrona. There's James, Jeff, Jason, as well as Kurt. I think without all these folks, we wouldn't be able to put this together. We've got a packed agenda today. We're kicking it off with a fireside chat between my partner Tim Porter and Srinivasa, who's a roboticist, and I won't divulge all the details, but it's a very colorful conversation. We then have a panel talking about the future of robotics in the Pacific Northwest. And then we'll have a very interesting set of 6 companies doing kind of what we call as lightning rounds, talking about the problem spaces they're after, the solutions they're building, the challenges that they're seeing, and even like what's next for them. And then finally, Jeff will sort of wrap up, and all of these things are between you and pizza and beer, so we'll be efficient. But again, thank you, welcome. We're excited. It's a packed event, a sold-out event, although it's free. But and without further ado, Tim and Sid.
Well, it's awesome to be here and see all of you. Perfect. That's great. See some old friends I haven't seen for a long time. See some new folks. And thanks a lot, Aseem, for giving us the opportunity. It's our honor to have Professor Sid Srinivasa here. That in some ways doesn't need any introduction for this crowd, but just the perfect person. Self-described full-stack roboticist, has been in the field for the last 25 years. Was a professor at Carnegie Mellon in the robotics area. We in the region were lucky to have lured him in his lab to University of Washington, where he's the senior Boeing endowed professor. He just spent 5 years at Amazon, where he started and led the Robotics AI group, which we can talk about a little bit. And then this was after co-founding Berkshire Grey, which was an early fulfillment center automation robotics company that's now publicly traded. And then just recently joined Cruise to work on self-driving as a distinguished engineer. So thanks so much for being here, Sid.
Thank you for having me.
So Aseem rattled off a whole bunch of drivers on why this is an exciting time for robotics, and you've been working in this area across all the different technology drivers for 25 years, as I mentioned. Does it feel like, Sid, that, N years ago when Amazon bought Kiva, it sort of put a real focus on robotics in production, especially around fulfillment centers, but have we gone now into the mainstream? Does it feel like we've hit mainstream for a lot of other use cases? How do you see sort of the state of the overall market right now?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here speaking to such a wonderful audience. I will certainly keep it interactive, so please do ask questions along the way. Yeah, I do feel like there's a lot of buzz in the air about robotics, most certainly about AI. I think that one of the key ideas, at least for me, has been to use the advances in AI as tailwinds for what we can do with robotics. 10, 15 years ago, even taking an image from a camera and segmenting it and understanding the semantics of it was an interesting and challenging research problem that many of us worked on. But one of the advances, particularly with foundational models, large language models, has been the ability to get really reasonable performance zero shot. Right? You can essentially download these models that have been trained by others using large amounts of data, and then get them running on your system and get reasonable performance. Right? It's, the barrier to entry to robotics has certainly lowered quite significantly, and that's very important. And that's been a real dream for me, because 20 years ago, only a few people could really work on robots, particularly cutting-edge advanced robots. You had to be at one of the top schools, or you had to be very well funded. But right now, I feel like the tools are available such that we can really put them together. Anybody can put them together. My kids and I built a few things over the past few weeks with using large language models. And I think that means that the stage is set for you all to be able to take those tools and surf the tailwind to actually build exciting and interesting products. I would also caution that there's a big gap between having the tools, building something that's full stack, and making it actually productionized and ready to get you large amounts of money. But certainly the barriers to entry to create that process have been lowered.
Yeah, totally agree. The application of these models to the computer vision space, I'll give a shameless plug, it's about to get easier. So a company that we're involved in, Groundlight, you can talk to Leo afterwards about what they're launching and announcing tomorrow. So continuing to lower the barrier there. In fact, I'm a question. So it felt like, for years that a limiting factor in some of these scenarios was the computer vision accuracy, getting the data, training, make it work, real time, all of those pieces. Have we now gotten to the point with the advances in some of these models that actually hardware is behind? And we need more hardware form factors for some of these use cases to pair with some of the powerful image models that have come
Yeah, I think that's a fair call. I go back and forth about it. I think in one hand, you watch YouTube videos of people teleoperating robots. You've seen videos of the Da Vinci surgical robot, someone peeling a grape, the skin of a grape from using that robot and then stitching it back together. And you can certainly see that the capability is there. The robot hardware is indeed capable, but yet we're not able to use AI and use our techniques to make that a reality autonomously. But I also agree that I think that the advances in computing, thanks partly due to Moore's law, we just have more compute available now than we had ever before, and that's a huge unlock in many ways. Some of the algorithms that we had built 10, 15 years ago that were too slow to run are now running real time, and that makes a huge difference for all of us. And I think that when you compare that pace of progress of AI and of compute against the pace of progress of hardware, then even though hardware has progressed, it hasn't progressed at that exponential rate. And so I think relatively speaking, we certainly are at a stage where if we could democratize hardware even more, if just like you're able to pull together the pieces of AI and compute and put them together to perform meaningful software tasks, if we could do the same thing with hardware, that would be great. But it's hard, right? And part of the reason is that it's somehow easier to modularize software and to monetize the modularization of software than it is to modularize hardware and monetize the modularization of hardware. The most modular hardware elements are motors or gears or conveyors, but the margins on them are fairly tight because it's the intelligence that you put on it that gives you the most margin. Where somehow we're able to do that in software, build something really modular and say like, hey, here's a module that you can use. We're going to offer it as a service, and you're going to be able to make a lot of money, and we're also going to be able to make a decent amount of money. I don't know if we've made that transition to hardware just yet.
Just to get some of the controversy or interesting topics. So, are we ready for humanoids? Given that, is that happening anytime soon?
I have some friends here who work on humanoids, so love humanoids. They're great. Personally, this is a very personal choice. I'm very much a nails person rather than a hammer person. I think humanoids are a fantastic hammer that you can use to do all kinds of tasks. I think the appeal for them is that once you have a capable humanoid, we can perform the same task that any human performs anywhere. But the details are important, and I think the curves are fairly, doubly, multiply exponential. I think so I don't know. I'm always also amused when a robot spends 85% of its energy trying not to fall. And but that said, so do we as humans. So maybe there's something to that. But yeah, I think the jury's out. But if and when such a capable humanoid comes into existence, I think it would be a huge unlock for all of us.
Yeah, this kind of golden age or becoming mainstream, it's also shown up on the investment side of things. There was an article some of you might have seen in TechCrunch this week, where they asked 13 different investors on their view on the state of robotics investing, and I thought it was remarkable just to find 13 investors who they were just focused on robotics investing. I don't think you could have done that, 10 years ago or 5 years. I mean, Eric was investing, but he was a pioneer, Eric Klien, in this area. And just seeing, other firms in the space who've been software investors for years and years, now investing in hardware, software, and robotics companies is really exciting. It's a little scary too. There's a little, don't know what you don't know, getting into hardware companies after having invested in software companies for a long time. Yep. But I think it's exciting. And so we've seen a lot of pitches. So coming back to this point about sort of generalized, this software entrepreneurs see this modularity of software and say, and you're called to wanting to try to build something general purpose. And their tools are out there, but I always cringe a little bit, in that, gosh, why don't you constrain the problem rather than expanding the problem? Start with something easy. I don't know, how do you, as you worked on a lot of different companies and research projects, how do you think about, constraining the problem to make the robot really effective? And this is kind of a general question. versus coming at it from like, let's try to build something generalized because that would be really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of lots of points there to sort of unpack.
Take a swing at all. Anyway.
One thing I'd say is that the big challenge with robots, and probably most of you know this, is it's very capital intensive. It costs a fair bit of money to put together a robot, to scale robots. And I think the scaling curve is also deceptive. And I spend a lot of my time working with companies to scale robotics. I almost always get to the let's make 1 or let's make 5 or let's make 10 pretty fast. But it's the let's go from 10 to 10,000 that we were working on at Amazon and now at Cruise, tens of thousands. I think therein lies the rub, both in terms of, and this is again a software construct that is very unfamiliar to software folks when they transition to hardware, because you think, well, I built one, I just copy paste and then I can build many. And there's so much wrong with that, right? Including the challenge that it's nearly impossible to revert hardware. You know, you've already dumped metal somewhere. You can't undo that dumping of metal. And so you're almost always retrofitting hardware. So it's almost as if like you had all of your old software versions still in existence, and you had to somehow sort of finesse them rather than just remove them and replace them with something new. Almost every robotics company is not just building new hardware, but also retrofitting. And that's another big challenge of like, how do you build resilience in your system design such that it will be capable of being inevitably retrofit, right? How many of us think about that when we build our first robot? Not that many, right? And I think that's why I mostly work on planning for success, right? Plan for success and then ask yourself, like, how do I retrofit? In terms of sort of general purpose versus specific purpose robots, I've always been someone who's focused on very specific purpose robots. Not in outside of academia. You know, academia is different. You get to experiment and explore, and that's partly because there's two things that you can control when you build a robot. One is the robot, and the second one is the environment. And the advantage of building something specific is that they can meet in the middle. Like there are always things that you can change potentially, either subtly or more dramatically. Even at an Amazon fulfillment center, where there's so many people working and there's just so much happening. And if you commit to building something that actually solves the problem, then you can actually make them meet in the middle. You can change your environment and change your robot in such a way that you're actually able to solve the problem. And that's a luxury that you miss if you build general purpose robots. If you build a general purpose robot that works in anybody's home, right? It's a really hard problem, and because every home is different, and everyone cares about the fact that their home is different. They don't want their home to look like your home because that's their home. It's unique, and so then you have to commit to building something that is so general purpose that that problem itself consumes you. It's almost impossible. There was one more thing.
No, that's good. I don't remember either. The idea of controlling your environment too sort of leads you to, hey, can you build a more kind of end-to-end solution or vertical solution? A company one of your brilliant students founded, Zordi, I think is a really cool example of that in the ag space. Might be, I don't know how many folks know about that company, might be worth just saying a little bit about how that worked, and it's a Khosla-backed company in ag.
Yeah, I think Berkshire Grey was backed by Khosla, and so we stay in touch. And one of the problems that I've been really interested in is around computational agriculture. Like how do you incorporate computational tools, whether it's AI or machine learning or even robotics in agriculture? I think there's a lot of white space there. I know a lot of people are working on it, even in this group. And that's another thing that I always look for. I try to find white spaces where robotics or AI hasn't been used, and try to figure out how to do that, how to bridge that gap. I'm just fundamentally lazy, I think. Like I don't want to compete against other people. I'd rather go into a new space. And I think what's really fascinating about Zordi, for example, is that we want to build So the mission of Zordi is to bring you the most delicious strawberries anytime during the year. And what prevents us from doing that, it's largely the fact that we can't grow these strawberries. Just the amount of lumens that it takes to actually grow them is expensive, and the amount of labor it takes is expensive. So the thesis was, can you build a greenhouse? Can you design and build a greenhouse, as well as all the AI and the robotics that goes into it, that can enable anyone to be able to drop that greenhouse in and to use some human labor, but very minimal human labor, to get you delicious strawberries. And interestingly enough, that company is doing rather well. You can buy Zordi strawberries out in New York City. But again, like I think in terms of the monetization curve, there's a very interesting ramp function here of you can build observability tools that can immediately monetize existing greenhouses, make existing greenhouses more efficient. And that's what Zordi has done both in the US as well as in Korea and Japan. And then you can leverage that to actually build better models, learn to solve that problem better, and then introduce automation. And I think that's a very powerful tool that some robotics problems have, where the act of observing itself is monetizable, and it's a prerequisite for the act of control. So if you want to control something, you have to observe it. And if you're able to monetize just the observability of it, we did that at Amazon as well. You have camera systems that are observing associates as they perform tasks, and if they're helping them, then you're already monetizing your business even before you build a robot that goes and solves the problem. And I think Zordi was one of those sort of fortunate events that happened.
That's awesome. Just reinforce, shoot questions if they're of interest, throw your hands up. I got lots here, but we do want to keep it interactive. Maybe we'll switch gears and talk about Cruise for a minute. So, you know, after having spent these 5 years at Amazon, working on their existing fulfillment centers and a bunch of other things, you know, you kind of could have gone and done almost anything in the space. Becoming distinguished engineer at Cruise is certainly super cool, but you know, tell what led you to choose that, and what are the big problems around self-driving are you working on there? Just to continue the trend of throwing lots of things at you. The self-driving space, just from my casual stand, it's interesting where you've gone through the hype cycles. Right, a few years ago it was red hot and it was here, and there was all these companies getting created and funded, and then we sort of hit the valley of despair. And it's like, whoa, it turns out this is as hard as we thought it was. This is, it's not 2 years away, it's 20 years away, and it kind of cooled off. And then the next thing you know, like, people are getting rides in their robotaxis around San Francisco. And it's like, oh, it's here, it's mainstream, So I'm just curious on how you sort of see that, the evolution cycle there broadly, and then why specifically you thought it was great.
Yeah, I think I joined Amazon with a very singular mission. I wanted to sort of bridge the gap between what we had promised in robotics and what we had delivered. I feel very, very responsible for that gap. And I found Amazon to be a really wonderful place to make that impact. I know several folks here from Amazon who shared that journey. And you are receiving packages at home today that have been manipulated or transported by our robots. And that's pretty awesome. I feel good about it. I can tell my parents, and they'll be less disappointed with me. That's why we do anyways. And I think that I decided to start an organization and run it, and it was a lot of work. I learned a lot. I had actually never been formally trained to run a business or an organization. When you start as a professor, you're just sort of thrown in the deep end, given lab space, and said, okay, now profess. And then you sort of learn things from the seat of your pants. When you start your own company, as you all know, like there's not a lot of coaching about how to run that company. You're sort of running around doing everything. And so I felt like Amazon was an opportunity for me to learn how to be a leader, how to be a business leader, how to set the vision, how to manage large teams. I had a team of about 500 people by the time we left. And that it's really succeeded in all of that. I mean, it was incredibly painful. I have a lot of scars, but it's certainly a great learning experience. I joined Cruise for a few reasons. One is I'm a roboticist I write code. I like writing code. I like hacking robots. I love it. So it doesn't seem like work. It just seems like a lot of fun. And I felt like I was losing touch with that core part of my identity of like being very hands-on and just wanting to hack robots. I think the other thing was that, in most of these cases, smart people will always come up with answers to questions. But it's the questions that really matter. And the best place to find questions are with those people for whom it actually means their career, it means their livelihood to answer that question correctly. Right? Like you can speculate as to why self-driving is hard. We can all speculate. And we all probably have a strong positive dot product with the correct answer. But I really wanted to know, like, why is it hard? Like, what is it that makes self-driving hard? And I felt like the only place to learn that would be to sign up to be somebody who tries to make these things work. And in terms of companies, like many of my friends have started self-driving car companies and are doing all right. I particularly like Cruise for two reasons. One is they have an incredibly strong operations team. And you all probably already know that like the main job of engineering and science is to build something that operations can muscle into a product. Right? That's it. That's all we need to do. Just build whatever it is that ops can take and turn into an actual product. And I think I was very happy that that Cruise had that sort of ethos. I think the second thing is that they just lucked out. 10, 15 years ago, people assumed that self-driving cars would drive like how AI plays chess. It takes a hard left turn because some air molecule moved, because a butterfly fluttered its wings like really far away. And it turns out now, self-driving cars, whether it's Waymo or Cruise driving the cities in San Francisco, drive like scared teenagers. They're like, too much traffic here, I'm just not going to take that road. I can't switch lanes, so maybe I'll just go over here. Major, minor, left, no, that's too complicated. Zipper merges, why would I do that? And it actually turns out that increases your trip time by about 5 to 10%, and nobody cares, right? Because you're sitting there after a couple of minutes of being in that car, you're completely immersed in your conversation with the other person. It's like sitting in a train, right? Like, do we actually remember whether a train took 5 minutes longer or not? We don't. And I think Cruise sort of lucked out into that fact that like really all you needed to build was to monetize was an autonomous vehicle that could drive like sort of a scared teenager, and then get better and better and better. I think that's how you build your margins. And I think I've learned a lot of lessons. One lesson that's very interesting has been the fact that it is monetizable. I think that's one of the things I really wanted to scrutinize was the financial models at Amazon. You spend all of your time building financial models and scrutinizing them, and so it has its own math to it, and it's certainly monetizable done the right way. And also there are just incredibly interesting amount of technical problems. One of the things that I've been working on at Cruise has been around simulation, testing, and validation. Like, how do you actually test autonomous vehicles? What does it mean to have test coverage? What does it mean to have high signal-to-noise ratio? What are proxy metrics that you can use when you're doing simulation, or whether you're doing rides with drivers in them or driverless? And how do you actually think through the risk of putting a self-driving car out there in the world? And that's been an incredibly interesting scientific and technical problem to address.
So interesting, it makes sense. I'll take a question. I feel like that last part about that validation is hard. You could take everywhere you said self-driving and just put in a large language model. And the same thing is true, and it's getting wrestled with across use cases right now. Go ahead.
So, Sid, you said you like specific robots for specific things because you can make the environment and the robot meet in the middle. And that you can, if you have a simplified environment or controllable environment. Driving in San Francisco seems to be not that. How does that change things? How does that change how you think about it?
Yeah.
Could people hear the question in the back? Yep, great, go for it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think I sort of broke my promise that I would work on specific purpose things. I must say, I at least one thing I appreciate about Cruise is that their singular focus on driving in cities and doing ride hail only. Right? So even though it is general, at least it's trying to be a little bit deeper in what they're doing. I think what's been really interesting is that a fair bit of our effort has actually been in trying to work with cities, legislation, to change the world, to make it easier for self-driving, right? And hopefully easier for accessibility. And as you all know, like curb cuts on our sidewalks exist because someone really cared about the fact that they wanted people on wheelchairs to be able to get off of a sidewalk without facing a huge bump. It's a magnificent win for accessibility. And if you think about it that way, there's just so many things that we've created in this world for able-bodied people that can change if we think through how we might want to restructure our worlds such that it makes it easier for humans and more accessible for robots as well as people who need that accessibility. So one specific example is around the fact that it is rather interesting that we still have traffic lights that go like red, amber, and green. So you have the worst colors you can pick for traffic lights ever. And it is really hard for computer vision algorithms, particularly at night, like everything gets messed up, right? It's very, very challenging. And so there certainly are efforts out there now to see whether traffic lights can just transmit their state. And things like that are certainly what we spend some of our time focusing on. I would also say that, yeah, I think a lot of what we're trying to do at Cruise is actually to try and be very narrowly focused, even in this sort of very broad space. And I think that's helped us a lot. So certainly using LiDAR and not taking on any sort of artificial constraints.
I think another take on this, the specific to general spectrum where you should aim is proportional to the size of your balance sheet. So the advice to founders, start specific. Amazon and General Motors, and they can aim more broadly. Aseem, how are we doing on time? Do we have 2 more minutes? I've got one more topic unless someone's got a question. I know an area that's near and dear to a lot of folks in the room in our community is sustainability and climate tech and the environment. I think robotics can play a really interesting role there. We talked about ag tech, and there's indirect benefits. There's folks in the room who have built recycling companies using robots, which is really cool. Just curious, I know you were thinking a little bit about that space, or maybe a lot, in over time. Any areas there that you think are interesting, or opportunities, or inspiration, for folks in the room?
That's a great point. I think that sustainability, particularly sustainable technologies, is another interesting white space. In the 2 weeks between my jobs, I spent a bunch of time doing some research specifically around, I somehow zeroed in on kelp farming and kelp harvesting. To me, that's a magnificent opportunity to really democratize sustainability. And particularly from a robotics point of view or from an AI point of view, it certainly is, and I want to, first of all, I'm not an expert on this at all in any stretch. And there's a lot of legislation that needs to go hand in hand with the development of technology. But to me, that's the ability to actually suck the carbon dioxide out of the air into something that can then be turned into a pulp that you can sell and make money out of is a multiple whammy, right? Like you're actually doing good for the environment and actually taking that product and doing something with it. And so I did a bunch of analysis, and we've chatted a few times as well. I still continue to believe that that's a very interesting problem. It requires someone's sort of single-minded effort. I hope it's one of you. But it's certainly a topic that I still want to think about if and when I have some cycles, maybe after this jaunted cruise.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is great. Look forward to the rest of the speakers. We could have kept going for a long time. Thanks again for setting this up and for you all to be here. And next, we have a panel that's going to be bringing a number of different interesting robotics companies in the area and talking about what they're doing in the future of robotics.
Thank you.
Have the panelists come on up. All right, well, big thanks to Tim and Sid for a really interesting fireside chat. A lot of the themes that they talked about are ones that we want to talk about on our panel. So I thought we'd start with brief introductions and then give an overview of what we'd like to do today, and then we'll save some time at the end for questions. So my name is Firdaus Pohowalla. I'm Managing Director at Cascadia Capital, investment bank here in town. We have a focused practice on robotics, automation, and AI, one of the first in the country. And we had our first robotics conference out in Pittsburgh last year, had over 300 attendees, and that's where this idea was germinated with Aseem, Jeff at Fresh, and others. So really excited to have everybody here, and this will be the first of many events for the Alliance.
Hi everybody, we've already met. My name is Aseem Datar. I'm a partner here at Madrona Ventures. I have a thesis around robotics, automation, and AI, and just exciting to see the amount of activity and interest in this area. Lots of familiar faces, so hello back.
Hi, I'm Klien, engineer sucked into the world of venture. 13 years ago, started a firm called Lemnos that focused on hardware when hardware wasn't as cool within the venture community, and have made a significant number of investments in early stage robotics.
Hey everyone, Amanda Mars, formerly of GE, Industrial Automation and Smart Grid, then spent some time at Amazon with driver automation, and most recently AMP Robotics, working on recycling robots.
Hi everyone, I'm Vivek, Nayak. I'm VP Engineering at TerraClear, where we are developing an end-to-end solution for freeing farmers from their rock problem. So at TerraClear, I lead the mechanical engineering and robotics efforts, and look forward to the discussion today.
Thanks, everybody. One of the things that we really wanted to do today was take the experiences of everybody on the panel, crystallize those things, learn from trial and error, and share those experiences with the group, right? And part of it is meant to be a little bit, not necessarily prescriptive, but hopefully gives people a chance to learn from lessons of the past. So the intent of the panel is to be very sort of direct about some things that have worked and haven't worked, but the objective is for people to understand what those things are and hopefully learn from that and incorporate that in businesses as you seek to launch those out or already have. And so it's really meant to provide lessons from experience. And so we've talked about a lot of things in the previous panel with Tim and Sid, which I think are interesting, but I do want to start off with one thing and reinforce a couple of things, and maybe Aseem and Amanda, you could start with this. But as you think about why now for robotics, right? What are some of the key things there as you think about, and maybe some of the things we've already touched on?
Okay.
All right. So we talked a lot about the technology advancements, the sensors, and just the capabilities, what AI can do. So I'm really going to focus more on the market side of the opportunity for why now. So two things really stand out. The cost reduction that's happened over the last 10-ish years for that hardware and for the maintenance of that hardware starts to open up. Most of the customers that I've worked with have said a 2 to 5 year payback period is what they target. So if you really look at total cost of ownership on, say, a 5 year period, including all of that maintenance. So cost reduction has started to make robotics fit in applications where it maybe didn't before. I'm seeing some heads nod, so it sounds like that's what you're living into. The other one is labor, especially what was going on in 2020. People just were incentivized not to show up at some of these jobs, and we definitely experienced that in what I like to call the trash robot world. So if you look at the cost, the fully burdened cost of labor, you started to see the turnover cost get higher and higher. In the industry for recycling, it's about a 300% turnover. And so that starts to be more and more a reason for automating, that you're not having to retrain, you're not having to disrupt the processes. And so just labor shortages, and then also the wages going up over time too. So again, if you put all those numbers in and you start to look at a 5-year total cost of ownership, it makes a lot more sense now than it used to.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't disagree with that. I think great points. The thing I wanted to focus on is just the innovation in the product space, right? I think there's a reality around, like, I mean, when I was young, I remember programming on 8051 microcontroller, right? And we were worried about like performance and memory management, and the cloud has sort of eliminated that to a certain extent, right? You can commission VMs, you can commission network, you can commission storage, and that's sort of like technology at everybody's fingertips. I think there's really great innovation happening in areas like the CV space, right? Which is making vision systems much more powerful, much more predictable, much more aware, and much more accurate. I think that's the second factor, and just as an example as to what's happening in the product space. And then now you couple that with things around generative AI, like the front end of like providing in command, in natural language interfaces, like able to control that thing versus you having to go build that thing end to end in the stack, but now it's an API. So drag that API, connect a few things together, and like Zapier, sort of create an end-to-end system. I think there's always an ability to sort of go from 0 to 1 pretty quickly and then iterate and get better. And then I think there's another angle around, I think you touched on it, which is the business model changes, right? Like customers got attuned from CapEx model to consumption-based model, and SaaS is a thing that everybody's widely in favor of and accepted, consumption pricing. And so I think if you put that in front of an enterprise and say, what would you rather have? Do you want to buy gold-plated hardware and systems, or would you rather pay per use? I think that's an easy equation from an enterprise perspective. Now, of course, there is some enterprises who are used to the previous way of operating, and they will continue. But I think there's a reality around business model changes. I equate a lot of these things to the cloud world. I spent a lot of time in curating Azure and building that business, and I remember the first early set of conversations we had. Like there were some CIOs and CTOs who said, "Hey, come back when the cloud is ready." And I was like, "What? Like, how can you not think about it?" And I think there's a lot of analogy to like where robotics is today. I think there's a lot of advances in front of us, but there's a warming up that the ecosystem needs to get through. And so I think it's a matter of time. My estimate, we should probably see 10x more robots than there are today in the near future, and I'm hoping that the bet's true.
Bold.
That's what I'm sitting next to.
Compare contrast. So Vivek, maybe over to you. Right, you're in the thick of things right now at TerraClear. Maybe you could speak a little bit about what makes companies successful, right? And not just the germination of the idea, but also the scale.
Yeah, so a couple of things that, of course you got to do a number of things right as a startup, your talent strategy has to be right, etc. But as, startups bringing automation to the market, I think it's really important to get the economics right first of all. And this is everything that's, likely to happen throughout the full customer life cycle. I think too often we're focused on either just the productivity or just one particular aspect of the economics, but the adoption costs, the integration costs with existing systems, the overall maintenance and support that goes through the full 5 or 10 year life cycle of these systems, all of that has to be something that entrepreneurs have to be acutely aware of when coming up with these robotic systems. The second thing I think that we've learned, again, we've made mistakes in a lot of these and learned these lessons the hard way sometimes, is really getting the channel right. So in robotics, with robotic systems, I think often we're a sort of a new breed of product in some ways, right? So we're not just shipping atoms, we're not just selling vehicles, we're not just selling sort of tools, and we're not just shipping bits either. So we're not selling software that's just easily downloadable over the internet. So we are shipping a mix of atoms and bits. And at least in agriculture, there are a few sort of channels that really do this, or maybe none at this point. So there's really a challenge around getting the channel right, especially a channel that can stay with the customer, again, through the full life cycle of the customer. So, and then finally, one of the things I think Sid had brought up, operations is really, really important because it's a long journey, it's complex. I mean, you can simulate all you want, but you ultimately want to be testing your products in the real world. And in ag, you have tremendous seasonality. So if you don't plan for your product testing, 6 months in advance, you miss the testing window, which is, say, if you have a harvesting robot and you miss the 2 weeks of harvest, you're toast. So getting that cadence down to a science, really planning for your testing, your product deployment, your sales cycles. You don't want to be selling to farmers when they're either planting or when they're harvesting. It's the summer and maybe the winter downtime when you want to get them warmed up. But again, at that point, they're not ready to buy either. So, what is the sales cycle like? So operationally getting your startup in a place where, you're not doing the two-step and the market is doing the wars, right? So that's really important to the success of a robotic startup as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add in 2 of my portfolio companies, when they started developing the robot, they thought, hey, it's great, we're in California, we're going to take it into the agriculture in California, and they quickly realized that as that season ended, those robots needed to be moved almost 3,000 miles, either to Australia or to South America.
Yep.
And they're like, we didn't think about this at all, that these robots would literally be disassembled, freight packed, moved down, rebuilt in a completely different environment, and then by the way, 3 or 4 months later, packed up, return voyage. That thinking about those sort of things and really thinking about the life cycle is incredibly important, because if you miss it early, it's a real hard problem to scale later on.
Absolutely, and then if you miss seasons, you're burning cash, right? So getting the product built before you run out of cash, that's really like, 101, right? So getting that operational plan that lets you do that is, I think, really key for robotic startups, given the capital intensity.
So that actually brings up an interesting point. We've talked to hundreds of companies over the past couple of years, and the theme that we keep seeing, once you get past a solution that works, that has had pilots and some customer traction, is deployment, right? And then also, how do you sell, right? So we've talked about this idea of RAS, right? Which is, it's a mixed bag. And we've also talked about how do you actually get your robots into the field, however you define that. How do you get them working and calibrated and then operating in the way that you want? And so as you think about those 2 things, and I'll throw this out to anybody in the panel, how important are those 2 things from your perspective in terms of actually scaling your business from something that's a good idea with some interesting traction to something that's potentially commercially viable at scale?
Well, sounds like you've got some stories too. We all have stories, right? So some of the products that I've worked on, just automation in general, that have had the most success is where the risk of deployment is taken on by the company, not by the customer. Take away that risk. 0 friction to getting it out there. And then really going through the sharing, where the financial model is about the benefit it brings to the customer, sharing that. That's now how you price. Where I've seen hesitation from customers, whether it's a robot as a service model, traditional CapEx model, is that they're committing to something long term without it being proven. And so really saying, hey, the risk of proving it is on the company, not the customer, just stands out.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I want to highlight is a lot of companies, start thinking about scale a little too early. And I think the answer to scale sometimes is the channel, right, or a partner. And to that point, I think you got to be really cognizant around how do you get conviction that you've got a product that's truly hardened, and how do you not bet on the channel to sort of go be an implementation partner very quickly? Because I think there's a tendency around like, I'm going to go build some great tech and some great product, and I'll hand it to the channel, and the channel partner will go do everything, and then I'm done. And I think that to me is a slippery slope, especially early on. Like if you get it to that point, great, but I think there's a level of maturity curve that has to hit, whether it's 5 customers, 10 customers, different environments that you have to go sort of de-risk before you go sort of double down and start incenting the channel to do it. And make no mistake, I think scale for these systems will come through channel, but there is probably something around betting on that too early that I think you should be thoughtful about.
Now I'm going to try to piss people off. Is RAS a thing?
So, well, Eric, I'm curious to hear what you think about it. Yeah.
Well, my comment on RAS is the following. Who's right, the venture capitalist or the customer? And the venture capitalist will come to founders and say, hey, a lot of them came from a software background, software as a service, that revenue model, that reoccurring revenue model, we love it, right? And so we say, you should do that as well as a robotics company. Funny thing is, it clashes with a customer. Half the customers are like, look, I have cap budget. This is the way I want to pay for it. But my venture capitalist said I can't offer it to you that way. Who's right? The customer is always right. So RAS isn't necessarily an absolute, and I think even venture has woken up to this. And furthermore, it's more complicated than just a simple one-time fee, right? You really, I think you commented on this, right? There's the initial hardware deployment, there's the ongoing work, and then there's the entire maintenance and service cycle. You look at Deere, you know, if you take John Deere and you look at their 10Q, right, or 10K or whatever it is, 30% of the revenue is actually from the service side of the business and the networks associated with that. Embrace that, right? It's not something you have to bury in the middle of the model. Bring it out. Other businesses do that. So I think the answer is yes, it's there, but it's much more nuanced than, you know, everything is going to be RAS.
And one aspect of RAS that's actually interesting is, I mean, SaaS has been, like you said, such a winner in terms of a model for software deployment and you know, delivery, that RAS has just become an acronym, you know, almost immediately. But a lot of markets that we apply robotics, you know, or to create solutions for, have peak coincident demand, right? So, and again, you're shipping atoms and bits, and the atoms, you can't just, you know, copy atoms at a whim, right? You can spin up a server and shut down the server. So you don't have capacity utilization problems around, you know, peak coincident demand for SaaS. But you know, if you guys remember Car2Go and, like, you know, ReachNow and those guys, right? It was highly peak coincident demand. Everybody needed one of those cars when they needed to get to work, and then they needed one of those cars to get back to home, right? But during the day, the capacity utilization of that entire network plummeted. So that kind of a challenge for RAS in delivering robotics as a service when you have peak coincident demand. Now, that's not a problem for warehouses, but it is a problem in agriculture. So we have to somehow figure out, and who bears that working capital sort of, you know, like the cost of that working capital? Is it going to be the robotics company? Is it going to be a partner, a channel partner that does that? And so RAS is, you know, extremely challenging when it comes to actual hardware in the field.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that, and I'm going to go back just a little bit to this. You know, I think Sid, you had a great comment. When you look at the amount of time, most startups, you know, when they do their initial pitch, they're like, look, we're going to do maybe 2 iterations of the hardware, and then we're going to be production ready. And you see this great scale to it to kick into that RAS model because they need the scale for MOQ on their orders, all these things. I can tell you across, you know, more than 40 robotics investments, no team has ever hit that schedule. They typically have 2 or 3 more generations of iteration to get from snowflake to something that they feel comfortable making 10,000, let alone the challenge of what about the 400 units I built before that. That challenge is something we don't think about a lot because we're racing towards RAS. Like, I need to get my costs down, I need my unit economics to work. Problem is that that curve just never goes the way people expect it. And during that time, it's just additional cost and additional challenge. So you have to think about those things as we want to be optimistic as roboticists, but the real world has just a way of slowing you down in terms of getting to production readiness.
I've had one RAS success product and one RAS wasn't really successful, but we won't call it a total failure. When it was successful, it's because the customer's funding came from their OpEx budget. It was a direct labor replacement. They didn't have to go through approvals. It was utilities, so it was, you know, 2-year-long municipal reviews on ratepayers, right? So I think it's important to understand how customers make their money, and that comes down to what now fits for them. Where it was not quite a success, you know, it fit for some customers, but not, you know, wholly for the market. It's because the customers had this mentality of, if we have an asset in our plant, we own it. We own our asset outright. We depreciate it on our books, and that has an actual dollar amount to it as well as part of that payback.
I think those are great points, right? Because if you zoom out and you think about how to scale and how to sell, right? Yeah, it's clear that you need to follow the customer's direction, right? And the customer's direction will be based on how do their purchasing departments work and how do their accounting work, right? And then the other thing you have to think about is how do they actually then sell to their customers, right? How are they actually using that robot if they're redeploying it, and how are they working into their workflow? So I think that's a nice way to sort of cap off that topic. Now let's maybe move to probably the most interesting part of the discussion today is where have we seen companies struggle, right? And this is where we really want to kind of be hard-hitting and very direct around kind of some of the challenges, because we'd like people to kind of learn from some of these things and be able to incorporate that into their own strategies and operations. So Eric, I'll start with you. Maybe you could share with us a few of the biggest things that you've seen where companies have gone wrong in the past.
I think in generation 1, I'm going to take investments going back 6, 7 years, all the way up until maybe a year or 2 ago. The three big things that we saw, number one, are three words: constraint or constrained problems, capital efficiency, and team. And I'll start with team. Maybe I'll go in an interesting order, which is, 10 years ago, everybody was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go grab an amazing team of folks from CMU, DARPA Challenge winners. They know exactly what they're doing. Killer mechatronics teams, best in class. And we unleash them on the problem, and it's like, well, they should be able to make magic, right? They are magicians. The funny thing you learn, and you learn this in a lot of businesses, it takes more than an engineer to build a successful business. And what we've seen in a lot of the early robotics teams is, while their technical mastery is amazing, it's a funny thing they always say about Silicon Valley is you unleash Silicon Valley people in the world and they sort of bring their reality distortion field out into agriculture, out to the factory in the Midwest. And the problem is they don't understand everything we've talked about, all those other things. Do you understand the service infrastructure? Do you understand how we make money? Do you understand CAP versus OP? Do you understand how to sell to us? And those, without bringing those things, you can bring the best robotic solution, right? But the best technology doesn't always win. And so I think you're starting to see teams that are much more well blended from the very beginning. And that's incredibly important. Understand your market, understand your customer, and then you build the product around that. So, number one there. I would have said number two, in terms of capital efficiency, I heard a number in it, an interesting number. She said 2 to 5 years. I can tell you that when I'm looking at investments, I'm looking at 6 to 18 months for capital efficiency. And that's going to lead to constraint, right? There are big problems, definitely. There are some big robotics problems that should be solved, but I think to Tim's point, you better look at your bankroll when you go after a big problem. But capital efficiency, how fast you can, deliver that robot, whatever economic model, and have it go cash flow positive. In essence, it starts paying for the next robots. Right now, the industry has really been focused on 18 to 36 months, and maybe even longer in some cases. It's not working. You've got to really think about, how do I solve the problem as capital efficient as possible? And capital efficiency is something you have to sort of unpack, probably beyond the full scope of talking here. And then the third one is really constraints, and it came up earlier. The best things, I think, early on, we're all technologists, and we're like, oh my gosh, we can solve big problems. And I think we were talking, before, Cruise and others who went after, automated, self-driving cars, L5, right? We're like, no problem. And most bets were that we would be in L5 by now. And what we realized is an unconstrained problem, it's just going to take a lot longer. Startups don't have as much time and bankroll, to go after unconstrained problems in most cases. So, I think if you can look at different markets, different opportunities, and go, how does I heard this said, the environment and the robot, how do they go together and constrain the problem as much as possible? If you can constrain the problem, over time, you're always allowed to open the aperture. But if you're unconstrained at the beginning, which many robotics companies were in the first generation of funding, what you're seeing now is they've made tremendous progress, but maybe not the market progress that they needed, because they're solving edge cases all the time.
That point is interesting, right? Because we've always debated at Cascadia, and I think in the panel as we're preparing for this, what do you prioritize, right? Is it the technology, right? And a lot of times, some companies that are founded by pure technologists that don't have a background in the problem struggle. So as you think about technology or the solution, if I'm summarizing what you're saying correctly, solution is really the priority versus technology, right? But then to get your point around constraint, because I think it's helpful for people to understand this as they think about approaching problems. When you think about a constrained problem, how do you evaluate the value of that problem, right? So as you think about TAM, as you think about unit economics, as you think about the ability to scale, the idea of constraint is important to be successful, but how do you actually evaluate the value of that for founders that are thinking about, should I pick this problem to solve?
I'm going to make one quick comment. TAM, we love it. TAM is BS. Like, okay, a crew, I'm in the auto business, $1 trillion. I can go up any mountain and get to the top of the mountain and look down, it's really, really tall. The interesting question is SAM and LAM, and but I agree with you. It's just focusing on SAM and LAM and a wide open SAM or wide open LAM, aka sort of total market that you can address, and then your launch addressable market, but then constrain it on the bottom side. Like, that's the magic formula at a really high level. It's like wide open opportunity, but constrained robotics problem. Interesting.
Yeah, just rewinding a little bit to this, to the constraint. So it's, this is actually very hard, right? Because there are examples where you've had constrained problems that you're seeking solutions for. You actually understand the customer really well, but you still get, the technology is sort of like a siren, right? It pulls you in. So in 2001, the Electrolux had the Trilobite. I don't know if you guys remember this, but it was the first robotic vacuum to market. Actually beat the Roomba by a year. And it had these ultrasonic sensors to avoid obstacles. Now, this is Electrolux. They sell vacuum cleaners. They make vacuum cleaners. They have the most, customer data on people using vacuum cleaners. Who cares about your vacuum cleaner bumping into your furniture? No one does, right? But they put obstacle avoidance on it, and then they also put mapping in it. So you ended up with a $1,700 vacuum, a robotic vacuum, when the Roomba was $160 a year later. They didn't have ultrasonic sensors, they didn't have mapping. So the compute requirements were lower. It lasted longer, it lasted for more than an hour. The Electrolux ran out of charge in 45 minutes. So this company that kept it constrained, understood the customer, still managed to get sucked into the sexiness of the technology, right? And who has an Electrolux vacuum cleaner here? A robotic vacuum cleaner. I don't think there's even one of us in the audience that has that, right? But Roomba, and now it's a $3 billion, $2 billion business. So it is hard. I think, we have to live this every day to say, do you really need this $50 sensor? Do you really need this $1,000 sensor? Because by the time that BOM filters down all the way to price and to the capital that has to be needed to put out, it's 3x that, right? You put a $1,000 sensor in your price, you better have an ability to command a $3,000 extra price. So it's hard.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is 100% accurate around the BOM. I think the other thing that we look at is, and said it differently, is does the customer have a hair on fire problem that you're trying to solve? Like, is it urgent? Is it now? Like, how are they doing it today? Like, is this something that is needed, or is this like great tech that you're just bringing to market and saying, okay, great, I have a hammer, like what looks like a nail, I'm going to jam it in. And so I think there's a reality around that. And the other thing that I'd add is there's also this fully burdened cost of operating and owning a robot or a solution, right? Because you look at the BOM is whatever, and then I can depreciate it and I can write it off my books. But what's the support cost like? Like, who's going to handle support? What happens when the damn thing fails? Like, what happens when it goes left instead of right? Like, if it fails, like, am I flying in engineers from the product company to go fix it? Do I have an SI who's trained and who's within like 5 miles of radius who can come fix it? Or am I now reverting back to throwing people at the problem? In which case I'm saying, oh, my manufacturing line is stopped. Like, let me just not bother and let me just revert back to the old because I can hire 5 other people now. Of course, labor shortages, etc., is a problem that they're grappling with. But I think those are like the fully burdened elements of the system and deployment that you've got to really think about. And that I think is the other element of like bubbling back to the conversation on what could make you fail faster.
And adding really quickly, when you think about constraints, again, we're drawn towards technology constraints. I think what a lot of leading edge robotics companies are starting to figure out is there's 3 other things going on, right? There's business constraints, which we've talked a lot about. There's regulatory constraints, and then there's societal constraints. And I can give you a couple of examples inside my portfolio. As an example, there's a company called Tally, and Tally literally has robots that run up and down supermarket aisles, doing inventory counts, skewing, there's a whole bunch of things you can do. And the challenge for that company, and they really had to go into turtle mode for a long time, was the robot works. The problem is that Midwest retailers were like, we're not sure customers during the day want to see a robot going up and down the aisle. And of course, we think of them as friendly creatures, we draw smiling faces on them, but that's not the way normal people looked at it. And so most of the retailers, their customers, had a much longer adoption curve than they ever expected. Robot does everything it's supposed to do. It's ready to go. But the retailers are like, look, we want to ease it in one store and then a few stores, and then just figure out how that goes. So that's an example of like a societal pressure. A regulatory pressure we had was, I have a couple of these, but one of our companies worked on cleaning dishes, so back end of restaurants. And the biggest issue they found is technology, again, worked completely. It was amazing stuff. The challenge they found was in the regulatory environment at the local, state, and federal level, there were 3 different agencies that will tell you what you can and can't do in terms of like dish cleanliness and the layout of the building and everything. So as much as the customer wanted it and it worked, the regulatory environment was so hostile that it slowed down the company just enough that the capital cycles just didn't work out for it. It will come back. That technology, someone else is going to come back and do it at the right point. But what I'm pointing out is as a founder now, you have to really look at all of these. And there's opportunities and challenges. I can think of sidewalk robot vendors who turned around and lobbied for regulatory constraints that were favorable to them versus their competitors. So you can use a constraint to your advantage, but if you're not aware of those constraints when you enter the market, they can catch you, whereas again, even if the customer likes it and the technology is there, another constraint can catch you and sink you.
So it's interesting, if I hear what everybody's saying and I think about, how you would go about developing a solution, put it in simple terms, it's good enough from a technology perspective, it's not too expensive with respect to what you're using, it's solving a problem that's identifiable and manageable, but where the value of the solution is significant, right? So at the end of the day, you can drive ROI and revenue from margins and sale. And so that's obviously a pretty finite matrix of things to solve, and we've seen some good examples of that. The other thing, just to build on your point, Eric, in terms of the retail example, right? It's also the things that you're not aware of, right? So we've all have heard of companies that are roaming, aisles of grocery stores taking pictures. Retail technology has now moved to a point where they push the data capture into the hands of the store associates, right? Who are actually just walking around taking pictures of barcodes and then using that to manage inventory and sales, which is a much cheaper deployment, right, than actually using a robot. So sometimes it's those technologies that we're not thinking about that are right there in front of us that can actually cause problems for our business models. If you were to, and this is a general question for the panel, as we think about that idea of deployment, we think a lot about interactions with humans, right? And human control, human collaboration, where's the value, where's the opportunity versus lights out automation, right? And so as you think about business models that incorporate a true human collaborative or human control or human supervised element versus something that's lights out, and you think about the development plan, do you have a preference as an investor or a founder for something that involves that? Or is it better just to sort of think long term and shoot for the stars in terms of a fully automated lights out solution?
I can't speak as an investor. I can speak more of the operation of implementing it in every product that I've worked with for industrial automation, so a number of different user types. The adoption cycle has been the biggest part of the deployment to think about. Training. Like, you just have to keep repeating yourself. And what you're really doing is upskilling the workforce. They have to be able to now understand, when is the system working as it's supposed to? When are you hitting an edge case? How do they work around that now? Do they have the tools they need to be able to do that? And it goes along with what Aseem was saying before about support as well. So how much can we build in the monitoring and control remotely to be able to tell, is the unit working like it's supposed to for the solution? We mentioned that word, solution outcome, right? At the end of the day, that's what the customer is looking for.
Yeah, I think I'm going to sort of revert back to what Sid said earlier on. Is I think these systems will fail. I mean, you should expect these things to fail at some given point of time. But I think the question in my mind is, what does the recovery path look like? Like, is it graceful? Like, is it handing off an alert? Is it like asking a human for help? Is it asking another system for help? And I think unless you think through the 5 whys, or like, okay, or what 5 whats, like what happens after, I think that's an interesting consideration to go make. And you've got to have like better design principles to say, how do you address in this particular scenario, human or not? The only other point that I would make in this case is, I think when you're designing an end-to-end system, you want to try and see, like, are you getting 99% there in terms of graceful recovery? Yes, there'll always be that one outlier case, in which case either it shuts off or you've got to have like a full intervention of some sorts. But have you really thought through those 5 things or 6 things that you need to go solve for? So that would be my take on it. But it's a matter of like maturation, even as systems get built. Like, the cloud was not fully backed up in DR on day 1. We got there, and now I think we've got multiple redundancies. How do we sort of get to that point with these autonomous systems?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make a quick point. Again, not as I'd love to hear the investor perspective, but at TerraClear, we're definitely taking a stepwise approach that involves humans, in increasing levels of automation as you get to a full mobile manipulation solution. So fully autonomous rock picking involves, is pretty hard. And so we are, taking parts of the solution that we're developing. We're doing research on full autonomous, rock picking. But there are parts of that solution that are actually going to be pretty useful to a service provider, driving around a vehicle. And we have, one of our sort of sets of features we have combined into a product called AutoPick, which is essentially vision-driven, just the pick assist, right? So you drive the vehicle around, the machine picks up, finds the rock and picks it up, as long as you drive over it. So that is an example where there is still a human operator. You haven't eliminated all of that labor, but at the same time, you increase the efficiency, you increase the productivity of that human. You're gathering data, and you're then able to use this to drive the full automation. Sid made a point about how the observability itself might be something you can monetize, right? So that's something we are trying to do as well, because the robot needs to see the rock, know where the rock is, know where the vehicle is, but the human also does, interestingly. So the human operator. So can you give them that information that makes their picking more efficient? So we are taking a stepwise approach, but I'm curious to hear, like, from an investor perspective, is that a great path? Because it is definitely not as, like, it's not going to the final solution, the breakthrough immediately.
My tip is that lights out automation is a keyword that I look for in a presentation deck, and that deck immediately gets jumped. and I'll give you an example as to why. So I'm going to take another one of my companies, Path Robotics, right? In the United States of America right now, we have a net deficit of 400,000 welders. The average age of a welder is 56 years old. They make almost $100,000 a year. We don't have enough of them. By the way, if you want to change careers, go weld right now. And so Path looked at this problem, and of course, amazing guys out of Case Western, like, we're gunning for lights out. And so I'm like, no, because lights out is really a step function to get to. But when they talked to the customers, what the customer said is, look, here's the thing. What I need you to do is not go lights out. I need you to solve the simple but hard problems of basic welding, so I can take the welders that I do have and move them over to the problems that no system is going to be able to weld in any reasonable time frame. So these welders are like master welders. They've been doing this for 20 years, and then you tell them, all right, well, I'm going to have you go work on automobile rims, monotonous, in a monotonous cycle for the next 8 hours. If you come into them, and by the way, they're also union folks, and you tell them, I'm going to get rid of that for you, and you're going to teach the robot, and then you get to go work on the hard problems. They're like, yes, absolutely, I love this. And the funny thing, during that training process to head for lights out, it was funny, one of the first times we went out there, again, to work on these rims, the roboticist set up this thing, and it got it going, and then the welders were looking at it, and they just started laughing. And they were like, you guys are doing it all wrong, like you're fighting gravity in doing this. This is the craziest thing. All that knowledge inside the system getting transferred. What I'm saying in a long, sort of long story to get to a short point is that getting to lights out is a journey. Mm-hmm. So anyone who tells me right away, I'm just lights out, it's going to be there in 2-3 years, I'm like, no. You probably don't understand the problem, and you don't understand how long it takes to solve the solution. But the opportunity exists right at the beginning if you ask the customer what they were looking for. And in this particular case, it's like, look, help get my welders who are in short supply to the real problems where I can make more money. If you can do that for me, I have plenty of business for you for many years.
And that lights out example and that concept is an important one, particularly in the context of welding, because that's one of the ones where TAM, right, is measured in terms of available slots, which is 400,000 shortage of welders in the country. And then the idea of lights out versus a collaborative solution. There was a company that just sold a couple of weeks ago called Robotics. I don't know if people heard about that one. That was a cobot welding company that had a certain amount of revenue, but actually had EBITDA, right? Which is probably a word we don't spend a lot of time talking about in our world, but it was profitable, and it sold to private equity, and there were lenders that actually wanted to lend debt against the cash flow stream that was coming from that. And the reason that company was able to scale quickly and successfully with a team of 12 people, half of whom were actually welders, was because they focused on the idea of how do we collaborate to enhance the human experience, right, as opposed to replace it, right? And I think that kind of thinking with respect to early deployment of automation for robots is something I would personally encourage everybody to think about, because it's actually a path to value, right? And at the end of the day, right, we're starting companies because we're excited and we're passionate, but we also want to build things of value, right, to the market. So that's one point. And then the second point, on the human in the loop, right, as a broad term, right, it was a great example that you brought up, Vivek, and the one thing I want to highlight for people there too, agree or disagree, is that one of the benefits is the capturing of the data around the exception or the edge case the labeling of that data and the refeeding of that back into your operational pipeline for training your net, right? And at the end of the day, that can actually accelerate getting to a faster, more autonomous solution, right? I think sometimes people forget about that as a potential pathway to both be, faster deployment, profitability to the extent that that's a thing, and then ultimately to the end solution. So I'm really glad we touched on those points. Amanda, you want to add something?
Yeah, one lesson that I keep relearning throughout my career, and I'm curious the day that I finally learn it, is that customers don't operate robots. Customers run their businesses. And so when we talk about human in the loop, really meeting the customer wherever they are in the loop. And so I've integrated with every SCADA system out there, and I just kind of keep relearning that. And so maybe you can learn faster than I can from that, but really integrating that data to where the customer's in the loop, wherever that is as a part of their normal business process, not making them go to a separate system to operate your machine.
I want to be mindful of time. I've got one last question for the panelists, but before we get there, what questions do we have from the audience?
I'm working in a company. We solve problems for retailers of all sorts. There is fundamentally technological problems right now from robotics perspective which are not solved. I'll give you examples. Connectivity to robots, even though there's a 5G backbone which is running, you can't even connect to robots. So like these basic fundamentals don't work. Or even things like when you're looking at UPH, which is units per hour, or pickup accuracy, they're not prime time ready. So for expecting businesses, I think the point you were making, that there is that big transition for customers to be ready and investing millions of dollars into robotics to getting the output. How do you think about that?
So I always looked at how do I bundle accessories like I'm going to shameless plug for one of my former products, the GE MDS wireless radio, that you can start to incorporate with your product as an accessory. You can also mark up accessories from a pricing perspective because it's pushing the easy button for the customers. They're not now having to run internet on these facilities to be able to they want the outcome of being able to have the remote monitoring, the remote upgrades, whatever it is for the benefit of that outcome. So just start to look at the whole ecosystem. Balance of plant is a term that we used to use. Everything that goes into that robot working, whether it's a conveyor belt, a motor, a wireless radio, to be able to get the data, all of that has to be considered as a part of the robot for the robot to work.
And building on that, I see so many robotics teams who do not invent it here, right? Hey, I need an e-stop, I need a radio. Let's spin up 5 engineers and go do that. The interesting thing is not only from the technology perspective, but from the business perspective. If you can, because someone in the room probably perked up and said, I have a radio for you, by the way. If you can activate that team's, not only their technology, but their sales force, you get inorganic sales. And right now, again, a lot of robotics teams try to build, what we call snowflakes. They try to build everything, and it's constantly in iteration. But if you can activate partners throughout the ecosystem, you get not only their technology, hopefully, if they can solve your problem, but you can also activate their Marcom, their sales channel, and that's the biggest thing because, again, from a venture perspective, what is ever venture capitalist looking for, right? Ever increasing revenue, 2x, 3x year-over-year growth. And the way to get to that is both inorganic and organic sales. If you can get other sales forces going, that's the peanut butter to my chocolate. If you get the radio, then you can do this, then you can go together in sort of a coalition for sales. And I think it's an underused weapon that a lot of robotics companies are just starting to figure out is, I don't have to sell everything myself.
Yeah, and I'll give you a real example. I looked at a company that was in the automotive space. And one of the challenges they faced, which is like every automotive cell was in a different network in that plant. And so, the plant manager came up to them and said, hey, great, there's data coming from all these endpoints. I have no visibility. These are all mini networks. And they're like, great, we'll partner with an SI, we'll ship you an appliance. And that appliance will sort of collect, as a field gateway, collect all this data together. And now we'll make a data suite out of it and call it data insights and sell you data insights. And so I think to your point around, there was an upsell in that scenario which they wouldn't have anticipated unless they saw the problem in the field. But the only reason that they were able to do that is because this company took ownership of the problem and the deployment and the success end to end. And if left to an SI, they wouldn't have been able to do that. They would have just walked away from the problem and probably retrofitted a radio. So I think there's some opportunities around does the system work as anticipated end to end? And if it doesn't, what's the thing that I'm going to go solve for? Might not be my core business, but that's something I have to go invest in to get the first 5, 6, 10 systems off the ground.
Other questions?
So on more consumer-facing robots, how much time do you spend on making them like, you know, people see a robot and they want to trip it up, right? It's like, all right, I'm going to show this thing. Or like maybe like kids see a robot delivering a package, you're going to throw it in the lake or whatever. Like how much time do you have to spend on designing around that kind of thing? Like just deliberate efforts to break or damage or just trick the robot?
Oh, I have plenty of video and examples from my portfolio companies. I'll take a company that didn't make it, though they were acquired, but Marble, who sidewalk delivery robots. And when they started working on, one of the things they focused on was making the robot appear friendly, and they thought a lot about that experience. But they didn't try to over-engineer because they knew that they were going to hit sort of the, the polar extremes, which is they have plenty of videos of kids and people walking up and just smiling and being delighted by the entire experience. And then you can watch the videos of with clearly malicious intent from the very beginning. And you know, in the examples that I've seen, it's a lot of just, you have to just get into the field and then understand sort of both the love and the attacks, and then design in you know, sort of iterative nature to try to get to, you can never solve the edge case. I mean, if someone wants to be malicious on your robot, they're going to. But you do start to learn things about how people approach them. And for instance, you know, with our robot in retail, like everybody thinks, you know, you want to go sort of schemorphic, or you know, you want to activate feelings inside the person that makes them feel like it is a person that they're approaching, not a robot. And I think some of those are being disproved now, that people actually, they want to recognize that's just a robot, it's just doing a robot's job, versus I'm trying to be a friendly human, you know, and come up and, you know, and I can interact with you, or vice versa.
Time for one more.
I'm curious from the manufacturer side, how you approached your operating system development. What were your biggest challenges to keep your robots on the edge, not edge AI, but just on the edge and sustainable as your fleet grew?
Yeah, the biggest challenge that comes to mind is cost control, especially for any of the AI training that you're going to do in the cloud. The edge is not so much a problem. The chips these days are amazing. Thank you, gaming, for bringing that to the world. But really, the cost control of cloud compute. And so the more you can be thoughtful about how are you going to track it, how are you going to do improvement projects and plan for that within your engineering team, the better you'll be. I mean, it could easily be $1 million overnight.
Okay.
I can't tell you how many of my teams have come back to us after burning up all of their AWS, you know, GCP and Azure credits and going, how do I get more? They just, that cost really sneaks up on folks faster than they expect. And believe me, they get generous credit. So it's definitely an issue.
Sometimes if you ask nicely, you can get more. I've done that.
So just quickly for the panel, as we wrap up, one question for everybody. What's your biggest tip for founders as they're thinking about building a robotics business? We'll start with you, Aseem.
I go back to the McDonald's 5 happy customers first before thinking about scale. You know, that's kind of something that stuck with me that we did right at the cloud, you know, sort of offering in Azure. Like, you always think about the first 5, you obsess over it, you get it to a point where, you know, you've de-risked as much as you can, and then you start thinking about scale.
The only thing that we sitting in front of you have that maybe some of you don't have in the room is scar tissue. And my greatest suggestion is there's an entire generation of robotics founders out there who have been in this for years now. Go network with them and ask them all the questions you have, become their best friends, so that you can make new, you know, mistakes and glorious ones, as opposed to the exact same mistakes Gen 1 robotics teams have made.
I'm going to say move the goalpost. Make sure that your finish line is far enough into the operation cycle and it doesn't end with deployment. So often we think about, you know, getting the robot into the field as success, and we celebrate it, we have a pizza party, and we move on to the next fun problem to solve. But the reality is we have to make sure that that robot is working. It's hitting those use cases that we're talking about with the focus, drive, speed, before we move on to the next thing.
Yeah, amazing points. I mean, one small thing to add there is, think of your company not as a robotics company, but as a doing whatever, it's, you know, providing whatever solution company. We're a rock picking company, right? We're not a robotics company. And, you know, if you're building autonomous cars for rideshare, think of yourself as a rideshare company. You're ultimately going to be competing with Ubers. right? So that is, I think, key. We're not building robotics companies. So that's
All right, well, let's have a big thank you for our panelists today. Up next, we have our lightning rounds, and so a nice selection of companies will come up to present.
Just to announce the companies that are going to be presenting today. Is it the same order that's on the website? It is not. We're starting with Roboto. Okay. It's WiBotic, Retrocausal, Ally, Apera AI, Roboto, and NWRA. And if you haven't seen the lightning round before, typically there's a time constraint. So we've asked each presenter to be 5 minutes, which makes it hard. They're really kind of constrained what they can share. It kind of makes it fun too. It's rapid fire. So we actually have a timer up here for the presenters, so they're aware. And I think Kurt or I will probably stand up when someone's at time to kind of help give them a cue, because it's really easy to go over. That kind of makes this fun. So with that, we'll invite up Roboto.
Shall I run up given the time constraint?
Yes, you should.
Do we have a clicker or something?
Yep.
Yeah,
it's right there on the corner. If you click forward, you should see your first slide.
That's us.
All right.
Hi, everyone.
You ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, here we go.
Hi, everyone. My name's Benji. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Roboto AI. We just came out of stealth, I think, just before last week, so hopefully you saw some of the press. My co-founder and I worked at Amazon for a long time on robotics for about the last decade, most notably Primad, the drone delivery project there. I don't need to spend really any time on this slide, that's why we're all in the room. We are big believers that sensors and AI are powering the autonomous revolution and powering an amazing modality of robots across the world at the moment. But one problem that wasn't discussed by the panel before, which we faced as roboticists for a really long time, is that sensor data is growing way, way faster than traditional business data was ever growing before. And that's because robots produce petabytes of sensor data, and that might be from cameras, lidars, and radars. And as we've heard, it's easier than ever to integrate these kinds of sensors into products now, given the better swap-C of these products. And of course, there's tons of synthetic data being created now too, but ultimately building robots is still hard for a lot of the reasons that Sid described and other speakers, and you just run into a lot of edge cases and you need a lot of training data to build them reliably. So ultimately, the problem that we're trying to solve at Roboto is that good tools to search and transform robotics data don't exist right now. The status quo tools like Splunk and Datadog do not work with the multimodal data that robots produce. As a result, engineers in all these companies spend most of their time wrangling sensor data instead of building product. And that's really a shame because companies spend a lot of money building this infrastructure in-house. They already have tight budgets, as we heard, they're kind of capital constrained. And you need to hire a lot of back-end engineers to process all of the sensor data. And ultimately, it becomes hard to deploy robots into production and then scale up your fleet and really succeed. And we ran into these problems several times at Amazon. So that's what we're trying to do at Roboto. We're trying to build an AI-powered data platform for robotics. I'm going to show two quick innovations that we've had just to really highlight how we're using AI to accelerate the robotic development workflow. This example that we call signal search, and you can see here, this is a screenshot from Roboto. Hopefully it's a video when I hit play. But this is a dashboard where you can jump into a robotic event of some kind. In this case, it's some self-driving car data from an open source data set called New Scenes. And what you can see is there's a video, the front camera of the car, and also I've pulled up the steering wheel angle of the car while it's driving. And what you'll see here as I hit play, as the vehicle is turning at this intersection here, it's turning left, you can see the steering wheel is going to the kind of most extreme position. It's turning. Cool stuff. And so generally, maybe you have an issue turning left in your self-driving car. Unprotected left turns are notoriously hard in self-driving. And so we've built this technology where you can just select a region of a graph, and it will find you all the other cases where you've seen this pattern before in your data. So in this case, it's a left turn finder. It's just a really easy way to say, take this signal and now find it for me across all the other drives, all the other data sets that we have. And now we can start analyzing the performance perhaps and finding other cases that we have the same failure mode. It really lets you answer the question, have we seen this problem before, or is this the first time that we've seen this problem? So that's one piece of technology we're building. The second piece is given the amazing capability of large language models at the moment, we've also made it much easier to search all of the robotic and sensor data that these systems generate. And now you don't even necessarily need to be an engineer to search through this data as well. So here I have an example where I'm just typing a natural language query, like find me all of our images with large objects in the center of the front camera where vehicle speed was greater than, what did I put here, 25 kilometers an hour. And so our system is able to understand this query. We're asking for features in the image data, large objects in the center of a camera, and we're also asking for temporal time series features where the vehicle speed was a certain amount. And the system will go away and then fetch us a bunch of results, and it's probably hard to see with the glare, but a bunch of the results came back where there's a big truck in the center of the front camera, and maybe we want to analyze our performance, in that kind of context. So these are just two innovations that we've been working on to make it easier to search and transform this data at scale. So that's us. I would love to talk to anybody here about your pain points related to robotics data. We are trying to give superpowers to robotics startups and robotics companies that do not have the resources of an Amazon or a Cruise potentially. And so we just announced our seed funding, our team's ex-Amazon, ex-AWS, and we're currently working on our V1 release with a bunch of robotics companies. So if you're interested as well, please get in touch, and we'd love to kind of give you early access and iterate with you. So thanks very much for your time. 20 seconds to go.
Hi, I'm Zishan. I'm the CEO of Retrocausal. How do I control it? There you go.
Oh, sorry, there you go.
No worries. So we use cameras and computer vision to understand what human operators are doing and help them do a great job. One of the biggest problems in manufacturing right now is hiring workers. Sure, robotics solves some of that problem, right? But as we heard, general robotics is not solved yet. So what we do is, so for instance, one of our customers is Honda. Their facility at Ohio is having to train 100 workers every single month, right? So we build systems that can help operators train better. We are a software company. And then once they are trained, how do you help them maintain high quality, number one? And then secondly, these industrial engineers who are trying to improve these processes, they are always overworked. How do you make them do a better job? So we collect analytics out of the observation process that we are running, and then we also have that generative AI piece like everybody else these days, right? That helps these actually condense these analytics down to actionable insights. So do you know how I can play this video?
Click one more time, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Just
Oh, fantastic. So this is our system. There's a camera mounted here. The operator is doing the job. There's a projector here as well, which guides the operator as he's doing the assembly job. So every step there are arrows in there that tell you exactly what they're supposed to do. So this assembly worker, they have to just go to that workstation for the very first time, and they're able to be productive right there. Right? And if they make a mistake, the system offers alerts. There are plugins in there as well. So there is some noise, and they forgot to do the step. And as soon as the operator fixes that mistake, so as we collect, so that's 90% of what we do, right? We are getting deployed with Honda, Stellantis, two large auto manufacturers, two of the biggest medical device manufacturers, two of the biggest appliances and hardware manufacturers. But then we get a lot of data out of this observation process through computer vision, through analytics, through IoT. So we take that data and we put that into pretty looking dashboards, like there are graphs here that tell you how much time is being spent on each individual step, how many steps are being missed, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, industrial engineers are not data scientists, and they're always busy. So it kind of works, kind of doesn't. So what now we're doing is we are combining industrial data and industrial specific GPT that's trained on manufacturing data that we are calling Lean GPT. We combine that with our analytics backend and with organizational knowledge bases to generate novel insights. So specifically, for instance, you have a line that's running. The system is monitoring cycle times for that line, and automatically the system can tell you, hey, look, these are your bottlenecks. There's some time taking place between this station and this station. That could be improved. Maybe the worker is having to move too much, and so on and so forth. And then it can tell you what to do to improve that process, and it can simulate that improvement as well, and at least give you an insight on, hey, you know what, you can cut down your lead time by half, and so on, those kinds of things. Another use case with real industrial engineers that we are testing out for this is industrial engineers have to do a lot of work for just filling out a lot of forms and regulatory documents, which does require some amount of generative text generation, but also knowledge from their knowledge bases and actual analytics. So we are doing that for them as well. We raised 3.4 million as our pre-seed round last year. We've done 25 different POCs. We are getting deployed with about 5 to 7 large manufacturers now. So some we have already deployed with, and some we are signing up now. And yeah, that's really us. Thank you.
Great time management. Next up, we have Ally. Is your clicker?
Hey everyone, my name is Mitch Tolson. I'm founder and CEO of Ally Robotics. We're creating automation for anyone. When I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs, and when I was 11, I had the opportunity to start my own concession stand, and I actually made $10,000 there. And I didn't know at the time, but what I was actually facing, what limited my overall revenue opportunity, was a labor shortage and my inability to automate my throughput of that stand. And how this resonates to me today is across the construction, agriculture, manufacturing, and quick serve restaurant industries, there's a $1 trillion negative impact on the US economy. And for Ally Robotics, we're specifically focusing on the quick serve restaurant, where there are over 880,000 restaurants in the US alone. So something that we say often within Ally Robotics is automation, everyday automation. And really what this is these tasks that you could find from refuse picking to livestock support to spraying chemicals in a paint booth. And across 60% of all jobs in the US, 32% of that has the opportunity to be automated. So there's already robots today that exist, and these robots right now are really focused on solving factory automation, and they have things like extreme precision, plus or minus 0.01 millimeters of repeatability. That actually adds cost to these everyday automation scenarios that we don't necessarily need to pay for. So why not simplify that design and deploy the right type of solution? And so that's what we've created within Ally Robotics. This is a 12 kilogram payload arm, 700 millimeter reach at 4 meters per second. It's the most performant arm in this category. We've also, to be able to achieve this and a low cost, to be able to achieve this, we've used technology like proven planetary gears that are 97% efficient versus what is in standard most robotic arms that are strain wave gears. They're 64% efficient. This gives us longer lifespan, as well as they're roughly 20% the cost. We've also innovated on novel joints, where now out of these single joint mechanisms, we have 2 degrees of freedom, getting us double the torque, no velocity loss for those joints. We've also done things where we believe that servicing for every automation has to move to that very end user. So this is something
Mitch from Ally Robotics wanted to show you our quick change actuator here. So we have an actuator on the side of our novel joint. We have this ring here, retention ring. We pull it, pops off. Now we can easily replace the actuator. We're ready to assume this is a new actuator, install it, snaps back in.
I'm now doing my job once again. No longer having to call a service tech. It takes 24 hours to get out there and then waiting for that service. The other challenge that a lot of robots have today is they're difficult to program and train, often requiring experienced professionals and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So what we're trying to do is lower that barrier to entry, and what you see here, James, is really using a new way of visual teaching this robot. So using a series of skeletal pose tracking and some behavior cloning, we're able to generate these give it the context of our environment, helping them give these targeted responses. We've also partnered with NVIDIA, so we have Jetson Compute in the box. We're the most performant robotic arm on the market today. And Evercore, which is a large M&A organization, they develop an annual robotics report. We actually made the map, which is pretty exciting. And what our focus is here, as they articulated, is really this business to customer type of applications. Again, starting with quick serve restaurants in the beginning. When I think about building a resilient company, I think about building the right team. And I believe in the speed and doing things right from the start. Within 3 months of forming, I formed the entire team, 14 people. We built an entire architecture 3 months later. We built our first working prototypes a little over time. 3 months after that, we went to TechCrunch Disrupt and pitched on the world's largest startup stage. When I think about customer traction, I think about where are we focusing now? Like someone else said before, we have 5 customers to start, actually. This year, we're delivering 115 robotic arms. Next year, we're just under 1,500, and years after that, we get above 6,000. We are actively in a crowdfund right now. You can go to invest.allyrobotics.com. We have 8 days left. Thank you for your time.
Alrighty. Hi everybody, I'm Ben Waters. I'm the CEO and co-founder of WiBotic. WiBotic spun out of UW in 2015. Myself and Professor Josh Smith co-founded the company. Everybody knows why automation is growing, but WiBotic is really focused on trying to solve 2 key problems for our customers. We want to make power and data not problems for our customers. I'll use BattleBots to explain quickly why power and data can be problematic for robots. Stinger here, who's flying through the air on fire, his battery died. And if you've seen BattleBots, you've probably seen this scenario play out many, many times where one robot's just stuck in the middle and the other robot can just wail on it. So Stinger, his battery died, his operator could not communicate with him. Lo and behold, this happens in the real world of robotics. And this is a real world example of where one battery charger in this warehouse in the UK, this was a company called Roboto, caught fire and it burned the whole warehouse down, cost $140 million in damages. Power and data have many layers of these challenges as well. When a normal warehouse that typically just has lighting and cooling adopts automation and you add 10, 100,000 robots to that facility, the power budget may not even support the infrastructure that can support the electricity to that building, may not even support charging all those robots at the same time. Someone mentioned earlier about data. These robots can generate more data in a day than a consumer produces in a year. So the infrastructure for power and data is severely lacking, and WiBotic solves these 2 problems through our systems. We develop wireless charging technology that autonomously charges robots, and we develop data that runs on top of our charging hardware so that robots can take advantage of the natural downtime that they spend while they're charging to offload data, send firmware updates, and control their fleets. And we have software that really ties it all together. One of the points I really appreciated in the chat was that companies, in order for a tool to be useful for a robotics company, it needs to cater to what they use, what APIs robots use, what other sensors robots use. So we focused a lot on the software of WiBotic to make sure that our hardware ties in nicely with all of the challenges that automation faces. The way our system works is we sell a transmitter box that's the charging dock, can be mounted on the wall, it can be built into the floor, it's pretty versatile. And we sell an onboard charger that integrates with the vehicle, and when the 2 come together, they charge seamlessly. The software that we sell manages the charging for a big fleet. Some of these problems are really interesting. If you think about what's the best way to charge 1,000 robots, right? Some companies will just wait till the battery hits 20%, and then wherever the robot is in the facility, it gets instructed to go charge. Well, there's a lot of inefficiencies and a lot of downtime and a lot of cost when you do it that way. And you're also not thinking about the longevity of the battery. Shipping robots when they have to have a battery replaced is an extremely costly challenge, as I'm sure many of you have experienced firsthand. And so if we can do charging in a smart way for the entire fleet, customers can increase the uptime of their fleet, they increase the longevity of the battery, which means there's a lot less capital expenditure with operating and maintaining these fleets in a market where these robots need to solve the cost problem. WiBotic has a lot of innovations when it comes to how we do wireless charging. We focused on this market of automation because our key advantage is positional flexibility. The robots only need to dock within several centimeters, and we can charge pretty seamlessly wherever they are. The software that we have has added value in terms of how we manage data and how those systems can communicate data through the charging link. All of that is done, and the customers don't need to have additional hardware to manage radios or add other costs onto their systems. These are really the 4 markets that we are focused on. One that is pretty unique, and a lot of companies, I don't think, have seen kind of how the massive scale of autonomous sort and retrieval systems yet. But this is a great market that faces these challenges. If they're dense, there's a lot of them. They operate at a very high duty cycle. They're track-mounted robots that sort and retrieve items in a large facility. That's a big market for us. Mobile robots, carts and lifts, and drones doing remote inspection. WiBotic has a lot of customers. We had our first profitable quarter in Q3 of last year. So our business has really prided ourselves on being lean, being cash efficient. We've raised $15 million to date. We have a 30-person team, and we're raising a $15 million B round later this year. Thank you very much. Go Cascadia.
Hello everyone, my name is Siddhartha. I'm co-founder and CEO of Apera AI, where our vision is how do we simplify automation in factories by giving robots intelligent vision. And I'm gonna just run through like some very recent stats. In Q4 2022, there was a survey that showed 75% of manufacturers in the US identified labor shortage as their #1 problem. And there's still over 700,000 manufacturing jobs that are open, that are unfilled. And that's over 100% higher since 2019. So even though people are back to work, those jobs are not getting filled. And the problem is not that factories have not been automating. There's tremendous pressure to automate. The problem is that factories have plateaued on their access to technology, on the kind of automation that they could do. This is why in the scenario of FlexEngage, a tier 1 automotive, even though they use one robot for 4 human workers in this plant, they're still 24/7 feeding their welding cell with humans, because the way that parts are transported from the stamping cell to the welding cell is by dumping them into this bin, and dealing with that level of randomness requires intelligence. And this is a very, very common problem across all manufacturing verticals. That's why selling Black & Decker, the entire socket kit, wrench kit, everything is 100% packaged by hand. That's why Magna almost exclusively, at the end of the line of their plastic injection molding machines, they pick those parts by hand. That's why Cepheid, COVID test kit manufacturer, they feed their kitting machines by hand. And that's why Procter & Gamble almost exclusively packages their products for shelf display by hand. And the way that we've addressed this problem is by taking a completely software approach, where Our AI-based software uses standard off-the-shelf 2D cameras, inexpensive solution, and it basically solves the two pieces of this puzzle for manufacturers, either on the picking side, dealing with the randomness of parts arriving, or on the placing side, removing the necessity for the placement of the package and for need for fixtures that are adding cost and removing need for in-depth conveyors. What we've built is basically the world's most capable and by far the fastest AI robot vision in the world. And our key insight on building this since day one was we're gonna throw away the classical 3D sensing that everybody uses. We're gonna start with basics of 2 cameras, basics of stereo, bring AI into the loop, and the $1 million question is how do you train that AI? And the approach that we took is it's 100% trained in a simulation environment using synthetic data. And this is how we've been able to solve some of the impossible problems in manufacturing, like being able to accurately at high speed pick transparent parts all the way to mirror finished parts and everything in between with incredible reliability of 99.99% success rate in picking and placing. And a side effect of having an incredible engineering team is that we also have by far the fastest vision system in the world. About an order of magnitude, our vision cycle time is faster than even nearest the competitor, which results in at least 4 times more productive robotic cells compared to close competitors. And this is just a quick chart of like where we stand compared to everybody else who's been trying to do vision guided robotics for manufacturing, both on the capability scale as well as speed scale. We're far ahead of anyone in competition. We handle reflective parts, we handle transparent parts, we handle deformable parts, we can work outdoor, no other technology can work outdoor, and we provide industrial speed as well as self-calibrating, which makes the integration a lot easier. And the proof is in the pudding. We've grown our ARR by 18x. We have about 100 robots that are guided by Apera AI out there. Our sales cycle and business model allows us to have I'm right out of time, have a 90 days sales cycle, which is incredible in the AI robotics market. And that pretty much wraps up my presentation. We will have an announcement soon about our latest round of funding. And I'd love to stay with the folks in the room for our progress and next round.
All right, that concludes the lightning rounds. Let's give another round of applause for everyone that did that lightning round. That was fun. I was nervous myself about the time, but it certainly made it fun, and I'm sure that preparation will help for hopefully future pitches. I'm excited to be here, and it's amazing to look out and see all of you. I mean, I think what we've heard today from thought leaders from these companies is just a small flavor of what's happening here in the Northwest. And yet we've been traveling to other locations for robotics conferences, for robotics community, when it's really here in our backyard. And so I think this is just a good example of what's happening, not only from a robotics perspective, but from an AI perspective. And when we looked at the market around the Northwest, in forming the alliance, there were about 200 companies, I think 206 companies, both robotics and AI companies that centered around robotics. So again, a lot is happening here, and that's built on the top of the backbone of everything that's happening with the big tech companies as well. So it's fun to run into Aseem at the Cascadia Robotics Conference and to talk about his thesis about enterprise integration, and to find some commonalities, and then to come into today and to think about, hey, we're just getting started for how we connect capital, how we connect community,
how we help companies work together, because it's a challenging space. I'm the founder and CEO of Fresh Consulting. We're about 460 people. We do strategy, design, software, and hardware. And so we actually are in the robotics and automation space fairly deeply. Last year we worked with 100 clients. We're working with several of the companies that have presented here. And we have a unique perspective because we see the challenges across that spectrum of companies. And big companies, we worked with the Amazon Scout team, and we saw what happened there, and that's been hard. I know some of you were on that team, and you guys did amazing work, and we did amazing work together. And then startups and kind of the challenges of starting a company, and everything we heard from the panel on starting a robots company. Hardware is hard. You add in the integration we've heard about, into the customer ecosystems, the capital challenges, the talent challenges, trying to bring that all together and make it work and have the timing right. It's just a hard thing, and that's where this community can come together and share resources, network with one another, discuss the problems that we have. So I'm really excited about getting this started. I have the blessing of talking about a very broad topic, but I think what we've heard today so far, really, I'm going to be echoing a lot of the sentiments that have already been said. But I hope that some of this repetition helps sink in some of these big level topics as we think about where is the future going from a human perspective and from a robots perspective. And some of the most interesting projects for us are actually just UX for robotics. We do design work, and just thinking about the user experience with robotics is sometimes overlooked when we have a team of engineering leaders that they're just gung ho about getting into market. I want to start with the human and robot relationship. And we've been kind of working on this for the last 3 years. We have this product called Harmony. It's about robot to robot integration and human and robot integration. And we've realized that we're each doing amazing things, but if we think about the future of work, it's going to involve a bit more complexity. And so how we tie together, share data, work together, we can do these discrete tasks, but once we solve those discrete tasks, it actually leads into this, well, what's next? And the idea of corroboration and collaboration between ecosystems, between products, will be much more important for the future. So it's something we've been working on, and we started in this journey 5 or 6 years ago when we worked on building one of the largest outdoor autonomous fleets. We actually were bringing together 7 different industrial autonomous vehicles, and we were in warehouses and in construction fields trying to get work done with people. And we realized, hey, this is really challenging at the beginning, at the end, in the middle, with humans truly in the loop. How do you get work done? And it's a challenging space when you're trying to think about truly integrating with something new in real work. Challenges that I'm sure many of the companies are facing today. We also have the opportunity to work kind of deeply with robot companies, and so we're working with a new robot surgery client right now. Let's see. Can you push me down, or can you give me one forward? Just navigate one side. It might be stuck in that video.
See if I click on it.
You're okay.
I'm frozen.
You're frozen. Maybe try refreshing. Thank you. Anyway, we've worked really deep in robotics, and I think one of the things I've appreciated and our team has appreciated, the deeper we get into robotics, actually, the deeper appreciation we've had for just the human being. And I want to talk more about this because in talking with lots of roboticists, it's part of their ethos and kind of their mission. But working with 6-axis robot arms is incredible. We're working with a few right now, working on an automation project. And as we compare that to the human hand, that has 27 degrees of freedom, 30 muscles, 123 ligaments, 27 bones, 27 independent movements. Our own hand, it becomes pretty marvelous as we think about our capabilities. And I'm bringing up some of these examples because I want to talk about human-robot integration. Working with computer vision and like edge processors and amazing sensors, and seeing the evolution there, and working in AI as well, it's incredible. But if we compare that to the eye and the brain, that has 200 billion neurons and 1 trillion connections and a petabyte of data storage that can do an exaflop of computations per second, all in less power than a light bulb. The human brain is so amazing, and if it gets injured, it can often rewire itself at the same time. It can self-heal. For learning, they say sight is 83% of knowledge, and hearing is currently like 11%. But you can, as you start to think about those stats, you can understand how important vision is for us, but also for robotics. The brain actually processes images 60,000 times faster than text. And so when Microsoft came out with their first vision product that was open enough for roboticists, that robots could actually see, that became kind of a game changer. And here we are, the evolution so much more later. And I want to get into how this is evolving with generative AI. But the point is that we're pretty amazing too. So as we think about the future, how can we think about leveraging each other? Walking across a busy street in real time in the real world, we take for granted. It's actually a very, very hard thing to do with robotics. We've had CEOs of big wheeled robotics companies. If you could just get us over the curb, we would solve so many problems. But it's something we take for granted. And this goes back to 1980. Hans Morvik had this paradox, and he talked about how with computation, reasoning actually requires very little computation power. But sensory motor and perception skills require enormous computational resources. It's actually very hard from a computational perspective to absorb gigabytes of data and process things in the real world. Now, we're making huge advances of that with autonomous driving, but for a normal robot, crossing the street, a very kind of hard task. So adapting in the real world in real time, and my point is that's hard for robots. And that brings us to the human-robot relationship. How do we think about our strengths and our weaknesses as we think about the future? For humans, we're incredibly creative. We have complex brains. We drive strategy. We can handle the unexpected. We can adapt quickly. We don't like change, but we adapt really quickly. We have high dexterity. We're high empath. We're social people, whether we like it or not. Whether we're introverts or extroverts, we discovered we still need some social time. It helps us. We discovered that through the pandemic. But hey, we get tired and bored. We get sick. We're emotional. We're irrational. We have limited memory. And we have fallible senses and sensitivity. And we tend to rewire our brains sometimes for our own beliefs. So there's things that we don't do well. If we look at robots, on the other hand, they work long hours. They're durable and strong. They come in many sizes. They can be reprogrammed. They're inexpensive for routine tasks. They're exact and logical. And they can be destroyed if they need to, which could come in handy. And I'm speaking generally. I know we're making great advances, but what have they not done well, or what's still challenging? They lack judgment. They often need supervision. Things often go wrong. Senses can be limited. They're less mobile. Even if you see some of the dancing robots out there, they've been highly programmed. They're less personable. They can create tension in the workplace, especially if they look like humans. There's often a very steep learning curve, capital curve, and they lack creativity. So as we think about our strengths and our weaknesses, and robot strengths and our weaknesses, and if we can combine the two, that's where we get these really interesting synergies, where our strengths are their weaknesses and their strengths are our weaknesses. One of our beliefs is that the future really is together. And I think we've heard that from today. So maybe it's just sort of like a cap on that, hey, humans integrated in the loop is a really important part as we think about the future of work. Not that there's not going to be, we're not going to grow into sort of lights out environments and that things won't be completely automated. But as we think about the future of work in it, where we have a lot of integration with humans, our belief is that we're going to be integrated. We're going to be in the loop. We're going to be augmenting. We're going to be supported and augmented. As we think about the 5 levels of autonomy, I think if we're at level 3 or level 4, whether that's driving or whether that's the autonomy of robotics, this is where we can be autonomous and we can be complete when the human is in the loop. And that makes problems actually a lot simpler when we start thinking about, well, how do we loop the human in instead of pretending that everything needs to be autonomous. So moving on to the evolution of human-robot integration. Generally, I think one of the trends we've seen over the last few decades and we'll see forward is that human work will continue to evolve into be more high-end work, the creative, strategic, problem-solving, personalized, customized, experiential type of work. Machine work, robots work will continue to lean towards the automated sort of systematic efficiency, commodity low-end. But there's an interesting space in the middle where we kind of come together. And right now, you could say we've heard robots, dirty, dull, and dangerous. They're primed for that sort of work. Where do we go first? If you look at a lot of the markets where robots can shine immediately, it involves often many of these types of tasks. Some of the folks that were talking about their companies, they may be hitting on maybe a dull type of work. Maybe it's dangerous. But this is obviously, these are prime opportunities. This is not new. But what I would say is that dull today is different than dull yesterday and dull tomorrow. Dull is not the same. And if we look at our attention span as an example, we're kind of on the decline. We're down about 68% in our ability to kind of have attention span in the last 20 years. So if you're here and you're hearing me right now, you're doing amazing. For how long this session's been, it's been really interesting, but congrats. So attention span has been down. And one of the things we learned in the pandemic is that humans actually want more meaning in their life. And they want to grow. And a lot of them had time to kind of think about that. And that means they want more meaningful work because a lot of their life involves work. And so what this monotonous, mundane, repetitive that should be summarized as dull, what we heard from companies, that just presented and even from the panel is that, hey, there's these large labor shortages. And we, in working heavily in the construction space with robotics, we heard about the government emergency that they couldn't get enough labor there. But now we're hearing that across a whole bunch of different industries as well, right? The restaurant industry, the transportation industry, logistics and manufacturing, where it's this convergence now of supply and demand, right? We have a lot more demand, and we now have, these robot companies are saying, hey, I can help with that. And we have the right things happening for this exciting convergence to come together. So we see this opportunity for creating more autonomy from the monotony we still see in the labor today, and those needs are increasing. Generally, people still fear robotics. We know this, and especially if they look like us. But the evolution of fear of automation is not new. The humans also generally feared the computer, and they were worried that this is going to replace us. It's going to dramatically change jobs. And the reality is that it did. It did. It did dramatically change jobs, and it did replace a lot of work. We now have 4-to-1 ratio of sort of knowledge workers to manual laborers, but we use a lot more of our intelligence and our brain power in sort of the work that we do. The World Economic Forum said that by 2025, machines could displace about 85 million jobs, but also create 97 million new roles. More adapted to this new division of labor between humans, machines, and algorithms, which I would categorize as AI. So again, it's painful as we think about jobs that change, but we're also be creating jobs that are new. And I think we can look back to history with what happened with computers and forecast that forward as we think about what's going to happen with the emergence of robotics picking up speed. One of the interesting things I observed, I have a podcast called The Future Of. We talk about the future and talking to 10, I would say, serious roboticists, many or a few of you that are in the room. One of the things that I discovered in my interviews is that there was a key belief pattern among many of them that robots will actually help humans be human. Talking to the CTO of Agility Robotics, it was like, you go like a few layers down. It's like, well, now why are you doing this? Why are you so passionate about this? And that a core belief pattern is that robots will help humans be human. And so unpacking that a little bit, what are we saying? And I think what we're saying is, we can do more creative work. We can do more innovative work. We can do more social work. We can do more meaningful work. And I think as we evolve, that is an opportunity to kind of think of. And I like to think about it in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maybe we're helping the human race as a whole progress towards these higher levels of self-actualization. Doesn't mean that the change won't be painful, that we won't need reskilling and retraining. I think Germany does a good job of that because they often, if they let someone go, they also try to actually just reskill them at the same time into something new. Maybe it's something for us to learn here in the U.S. But this might be a trend in the future. As human and robots kind of come together and we evolve together in the future, maybe we have the opportunity to focus on some of these bigger problems, like the garbage problem, like the fact that we still are at war with a lot of other countries, like the climate change issues that we are so presently aware of, especially in this area. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the future of AI. It's like hand in hand, we're hearing about robotics and AI. And there was an article that came out this month from the Atlantic that said AI is running circles around robotics. And I think they got that wrong. I think the title should be AI is paving the way for robotics. And I think the examples that we heard just today of how AI is incorporated into robotics, into work, is really about accelerating speed, which is the last great competitive advantage. And I think that's why we see the horse race that we're seeing right now with AI. So I want to speak to that a little bit and say, well, how does generative AI apply to robotics? I know a few of the companies talked about some things that they're doing with generative AI, but just broadly, we saw ChatGPT set the record for the fastest growing user base. So 0 to 100 million in 2 months after launch. And I think now there's about a billion monthly users on ChatGPT, maybe 2 billion in the ecosystem as we consider other people and companies that are integrating with that. And I would say usability was the killer feature. Similar to kind of the Apple smartphone and some other products that have been like the game changer product, maybe the Amazon Alexa product that came out that created the wave for the voice AI products. Usability was like a killer feature. And that's another, I think, reminder for us as we think about the future of human and robot integration. Did we lose it?
I think the TV turned off, yeah.
Probably the smart TV.
It's actually it's the smart power in the building.
Okay. It's amazing, often with being so deep in hardware and software, and sometimes you struggle with the simple things, the TVs and the projectors and everything else. So.
You got an opportunity.
Thank you. I can wait just a minute. But let's see, where was I? Oh, I was talking about the future of generative AI. And so what's been interesting has been, it's not only, ChatGPT, but if you look at the headlines in March, there's been like 30 to 50 headlines of other companies that are doing, credible things with generative AI. Definitely all the big tech companies. And if you follow, Meta or Google, Amazon, Microsoft, just look at what they're putting out almost on a weekly basis. it's kind of amazing what's happening. And that's not saying that there's not incredible things happening at the startup level and all the rest of the ecosystem. You know, the generative AI has really enhanced our ability to create. And I've talked to people who've been up all night kind of playing once they kind of start playing with generative AI. I'm like, well, why are they doing that? And it's sort of this playful nature of this ability to create, this sort of sparking imagination. It was Einstein who said that imagination is more important than knowledge, and he was someone that understood quantum physics and the deep mathematics. But he rode a light beam in his head to come up with the theory of relativity. So there's this interesting idea of like, can we spark our imagination? Can we actually create better with some of this generative AI, or is it taking it away from us? Definitely, if the world is a market share, we are sort of well on our way, and I don't know where to pin generative AI on the market adoption curve and the speed S curve or the Gartner's hype cycle. It seems to be everywhere. But it's well on its way towards mass adoption. It seems to be similar to voice AI, which it was the last thing I remember that moved as fast as this. It wasn't as fast, but it moved incredibly fast, where half the world now is using voice AI in one way or another via the smart devices or just through their phones, which is where the big tech companies adopted those platforms. Bill Gates said, we always overestimate the change that technology will occur in the next 2 years. This is back in 1996, by the way. But he said we underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. So he said, don't let yourself be lulled into inaction. And I would say for generative AI, we might change that to be like 3 months and 1 year, because things are just moving that fast. So I'm going to skip over some of the examples that we're seeing from others, but there's a lot happening in the ecosystem of generative AI. How does that apply to robotics? We're here to talk about robotics. Coding is a big part of robotics. They say, the future of robotics is also software. Maybe the future of hardware is also a big play is software. And so we're seeing, GitHub launch Copilot X, Amazon introduced Code Whisperer, and also Bedrock with a bunch of large LLMs. And they're purporting, hey, you can code 57% faster. And that's a tall order, a tall claim. But it's interesting nonetheless. Microsoft is integrating ChatGPT with robotics. And this is really interesting when they are actually now getting into robotics tasks. And this is generally what we're seeing with all the big tech companies. They also announced SMART, which is an efficient decision-making paradigm across various control tasks. Meta introduced SAM, which is the segment anything model. As they're saying, they have a 400 times larger data set than anything else in the market for segmenting things that you can see both in video and in photos. They introduced GenOn, which can take a demo environment and with zero-shot deployment generate a whole bunch of other environments for testing and for simulation. They introduced the artificial visual cortex, which can help robots learn just by watching videos, and that can translate into adaptive skill coordination. Google introduced Palm E, the pathways learning model that's embodied, and it's designed for robotics, where they have robot manipulation and task and motion planning. And they've come together and said, hey, we have 526 billion parameters in this model, 22 billion of which are visual. And they're saying when you bring those together, bring together the large language models and the visual models, you have much higher accuracy. And so they have these examples where it's like, oh, in their paper, hey, use these ingredients to make cake batter. And it basically creates a series of tasks for the robot to perform just by looking at an image. They have this example of, hey, if a robot wants to be useful in this restaurant that doesn't have enough labor, what should it do? And it generates the task. I need to clean the table, pick up the trash, pick up the chairs, wipe chairs, and put chairs down. And that's all done sort of naturally by calling their engine. They said in their AI blog that scaling transformers to hundreds of billions of parameters unlocks these emergent capabilities. And combining the large visual model with the language model can significantly advance the state of art in robotics tasks. So I think we're hearing a lot about what's happening on the language front, but we haven't been hearing maybe as much as what happening is on the visual front and the robotics front. And that's why we want to keep talking about this. In our next session together, we want to go deep dive into generative AI for robotics in particular, and invite a bunch of big companies and some of the startups in the space to go even deeper on what's happening, because it's happening quickly. Like week by week, like something was announced last night, and you can almost look week by week, there's things that are being deployed. And I think, again, it goes back to this race and speed being kind of the last great competitive advantage. I think the bottom line at high level is like computers can now learn very quickly from visuals. We talked about the human brain and how that's connected to our eyes and how powerful that is. But now we're in this position where computers and robots can do this too. So why does this matter for robotics? You can generate environments, language, context, code, steps, reasoning, tasks, parts, size, and distance with everything I've seen at the left. And how does that translate over to the right? It translates to this increased ability to perceive, understand, reason, communicate, and collaborate. So as we think about the future of human-robot integration, natural language, natural tasks, natural environment, this can all lead to more natural integration, whereas I would say otherwise this has been slower. It's been harder if we look back in history. That scenario I said of adapting in the real-to-world time, crossing the street, might be more feasible, more palpable now. Not that it wasn't possible, it was just hard. And if we go back to Morvik's paradox that I started with, this requires, the sensory motor and perception skills require an enormous amount of computational resources. We actually have those now. And that's the interesting thing. As we think about the speed of AI and the backbone of the cloud, it's a rising tide for robotics. So that should help accelerate human-robot integration. And there's no better place for this than the Pacific Northwest. It's prime for leadership in this area because we are the cloud city. We have this large AI metro where we have all these AI companies. Like I mentioned before, 204 robotics and AI companies that we've sort of tracked in the area. So to wrap up, and it looks like I might be finishing a few minutes early because that was a lot of content. As we think about designing the future together, humans, we don't like change. The first part of the change management cycle is shock and denial, anger and frustration. We're probably seeing some of that with the latest happening in generative AI. But it's a process also that fuels growth for enthusiasm, commitment, rebuilding, creativity, and hope. And there's this question of like, will AI replace our creativity, or will it amplify it? And I'm not here to answer that question one way or another. I actually think it can be both. And I think if we look at technology in general, what we've seen over the last 15 years as technology has dramatically changed us, whether we like it or not, especially with the introduction of the smartphone being so prominent across all of society, is that technology can enhance our relationships, our knowledge, and our creativity. It can also hurt our relationships, our knowledge, and our creativity. It has this duality, and technology tends to have a life of its own. It just goes. Whether we want to create a 6-month moratorium on holding it back or not, it goes. So regardless, I think we will evolve our belief of what it means to be human, much like we've evolved in the last few decades. We definitely won't keep up individually. We don't keep up with technology very well. But collectively, we can come together and we can design the future. And design sits at the intersection of sort of humans and technology. And that's why I was excited about creating this alliance and thinking about all the power of the big tech and everyone else in the chain, as well as the ecosystem of what's going on in ag on the east side of this state, and on the west side, and then in the surrounding states from a manufacturing and automation perspective. So we have this opportunity, although it might seem small for us individually and collectively, how do we design in humanity and not out? And there's really no better time right now to kind of create, to grow, and to think, and design the future with intent. So with that, I want to say thank you for being here for this launch event. Thanks for everyone for presenting. I think we got a small taste of what's here in the Northwest. As far as a call to action, we would say give us some feedback. Let us know what you thought of this first event. Let us know if you want to be involved. We're definitely at sort of ground zero. And please be on the lookout for future events. I mentioned the next event, we want to do deep dive on generative AI for robotics and bring different companies to kind of talk about that from the ecosystem. But I would envision something like a quarterly event. We're definitely focused on kind of local resources, but we believe we can shape also global standards. And that's sort of our prerogative together to make this something, given all that we're doing here together in the Northwest. So with that, I'm going to invite you over to the kitchen area for pizza, beer, and wine. And please take a moment to connect with those that you may not know. And let's give a round of applause to everyone that participated and put this event on.